Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the channel. My name is Paladin Dance, and if you hear that my voice is a little clearer, a little higher quality, it is because I did get a new microphone. I was getting tired of how I sounded on my old headset microphone, so I hope you guys enjoyed the slightly better sound quality. Also, thank you guys so much for getting me to 2K subs. It's unbelievable. I feel like just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was thanking you guys for getting me to 1K subs, and now here we are at 2K. Thank you so much for all the support everyone has been showing me. Thanks you guys for coming out to the streams, those of you that have. I really do appreciate it, guys. You don't even know. But anyways, due to popular demand, just like the last video I did, I will be going over my UI, my weak auras, and my add-ons in this video. Now, for those of you that want to get right into it and don't care about my thoughts on UIs, weak auras, add-ons, and stuff like that, how they may or may not affect gameplay, feel free to use the timestamps down below or in the timeline to skip ahead. But for those of you that care, let me share some of my thoughts before I get into my overall UI and the rest of the stuff. Now, the base UI for WoW, in my opinion, this is just an opinion, is absolute trash tier dog water. Yeah, you heard me right, it sucks. I remember when my friends first convinced me to play the game back in Mist of Pandaria, I logged in for the first time ever, looked at the UI, and laughed. I could not believe that it looked that old and dated, and the game was like, I don't know, 9-10 years old back then. I couldn't believe that the best MMO available had such a trash tier UI. And not only did it look old, but you can't really customize much of it, right? Like, sure, you can move around party frames, you can move your player frame, your target frames, but aside from that, there really isn't that much customization you can do with it from the baseline game. To do stuff like that, you'd have to rely on add-ons or UI overhauls like LVUI in order to really customize the entire user interface. And I don't understand how 15 years after the game's been made, how that isn't a baseline feature. For example, I played Final Fantasy XIV back in the fall before Shadowlands launched, which was quite enjoyable, by the way. And baseline, I can move around and resize all the action bars in a very intuitive way, kind of exactly how LVUI works, to be honest. So for all these reasons, that's why I chose to download LVUI a couple years ago. Now, two things here. Firstly, you can play the game with the base UI and do just fine. I could play the game with the base UI right now and do just as well in my keys and stuff like that. The UI isn't going to improve your ability as a player, unlike maybe certain add-ons and weak auras might be able to. So just keep that in mind. Secondly, the UI setup comes down to preference. So for me, overhauling the UI made the game more enjoyable to play. Now, when I initially downloaded LVUI, I spent hours learning what you could change, what changed what, and I spent probably about 3 hours sitting there just trying to get a base UI. Now over time, I've spent more and more hours over the years fine-tuning the UI where I want to tweak or improve something. And so I encourage you, if you download my UI or anybody else's UI, please customize it. Unless you really enjoy the UI you downloaded, right? Unless you download my UI and you're really enjoying it, the whole point of UI is for it to be individualized. So feel free to add on to it or remove from it what you will. Now, with all that said, let me explain how I set up my UI. So if it wasn't already apparent, I do have LVUI, and here is a section where you can change absolutely anything you could ever possibly think of for this user interface. To give you an example of how much there is to change, I'll toggle the anchors down here, and all these frames that you see here, these were all set by me specifically where they are. You can resize them. I've resized all of them to be exactly as big as I want them to be. All this stuff is stuff you can customize with LVUI. Now, you don't have to download this. This is just what I use. There are many other user interfaces that you can use. There are also other add-ons where you don't have a complete UI overhaul that you can use. So I encourage you to look at other stuff. But for those of you that wanted my UI, this is it. I went for a very minimalistic look. I do have on the right side here just a ton of mounts. I don't really use this area anymore. The only time I really bother with this is when I go to use my alchemy. I'll click on here. And my Grand Expedition Yak, because I like to T-Mog, and you know, this is my repair mount as well. So I really only use that for those two purposes, and then my Hearthstones are also up here, although I can just, you know, use them from my bags. The main thing is I have my action bars down here with all the relevant stuff. I usually have my initial rotation and relevant spells on these first two rows. I do have half of my rotation down here, These are focus kicks that I use, and then these are macros for specific things I want to do in chat. So let's say I want someone, I'm in a dungeon group, I want to invispot a specific area, I want to let the group know. I can just spam this and it will spam it in the chat. Same thing with lust. I have a little lust macro in case I'm not in comms, just so that I can spam it and they know that they have to lust this boss or this pack wherever we might be. So very clean, at least I think so. I just have my action bar set up for exactly what I need, and there should be enough buttons here for just about any class. My player frame is very simplistic. I do have buffs and debuffs. If I have my target frame show up, it will also have buffs and debuffs. The buffs and debuffs is a little bit screwed up here, so if you do download it, you might want to tweak that a little bit. I just kind of don't really care too much about it, but you will see some stuff overlap here every once in a while if you do use this UI. Now, if I set focus something, which I can do by pressing my Q, my set focus will come up here. This is important for, you go into a certain trash pack, right? Let's say you're inspired of Ascension, you have one of the big golems, you're going to want to be kicking Rebellious Fist, but you want to tab to another target because your Avenger Shield can interrupt them, right? Well, you can focus them with, a keybind, a macro, and then you can make another keybind. In my case, I have E bound down here to interrupt that focus target. So whenever I see Rebellious Fist come up on this bar here, I know that I can kick that person even when I'm not targeting them. So that's why I have these frames set up and those two little macros there. But that is how my basic UI looks. Now for my details, I have that set up down here. This is my right chat. I will toggle it real quick so you guys can see, but this is my right chat. I have this invis, so all I get is this bar right here that provides me relevant information that I like to see, like my FPS, my MS, the time, how much gold I have. So I have that little bar here, and then underneath I kind of just nested the details panes, and that's how I like to have my DPS and healing meters down here. Very simple. Chat is still on the left hand side for me here. So everything is pretty simplistic. There is not that much clutter. My party and raid frames will show up on the left hand side. You can't see them now because I'm not in a party or raid, but as you can see here, these are my party frames, these are my raid frames. Pretty standard, to be honest. Some people like to put these elsewhere. I'll see people putting them in front or underneath their bars. All preference, obviously. That is where I have mine set up. And then here I have weak auras, which I will touch upon later, but this is a weak aura package I got from another YouTuber called Quasi. I'll put the links to his weak aura video for those of you that may want his weak auras. This is a holy power weak aura, which I have here, and then in between here I have his other weak auras, which will show me stuff like consecration uptime, shield of the righteous uptime, things of that nature. But that is basically it for my UI setup. It is very simple. I have tweaked it many times over the years, and I just try and keep it as minimalistic as possible. Now move on to my weak auras. Alright guys, so for my weak auras, as you can see, I do not have a very extensive list of weak auras. I have seen many other players that do a lot more weak auras, and honestly, I do not find there to be a need to have so many weak auras to the point where your screen is just, there's something popping up everywhere. Personally, I don't like that style of weak auras. I don't find the need to have that many weak auras. So I'll go into what weak auras I have and why I have them downloaded. The first one, like I mentioned slightly before, are the Quasi Prop Paladin weak auras. He does have these for all tanking specs. And this is just going to be a bar that shows up wherever you want it. So I can move this down here. I just like to place mine above my action bars. And it's going to have all your relevant cooldowns popping up here. So this is very good specifically for my Shield of the Righteous and Consecration. I know exactly when my Consecration is going to run out, as well as when my Shield of the Righteous is going to run out. So I know when I have to renew or refresh those cooldowns. If I pop Bubble, for example, it'll count down and it'll tell me how many seconds I have left of invulnerability. Those are things that I think are very relevant to any player in World of Warcraft, but especially tanks, because knowing how long you have left on Shield of the Righteous, for example, is pretty important, right? You want to know whether or not you're going to have that active mitigation up at all times. Now, I do have these two custom weak auras that I made myself. Very simple. I made them myself, nothing fancy about them. I have the Bulwark of Righteous Fury weak aura, just right here next to my nameplate so that I can track how many targets I hit with my Avenger Shield for the Empowered Shield of the Righteous. I also have this Combat Weak Aura which shows up here. This is just to track my Soulbind for Pelagos whenever I'm running that one. It tracks my combat meditation, so whenever I have those orbs available, I try, if possible, to pick them up, and this just tracks how much time I have left on those. So right off the bat, I can just tell you, you don't need Bulwark or this combat meditation tracker, right? I could play without these 100%. They don't really add that much. I don't really need them. They're just there kind of just because I enjoy having them there. I enjoy having that tracking there. I really do think that just having weak auras tracking your active mitigation and personal CDs, that's what's going to be the more valuable kinds of weak auras, at least for tanks and players in general. Another weak aura I do get asked about many times is my cursor weak aura. So I do have this pink circle around my cursor. This is a very simple weak aura you can download. There are many of them, and you can customize the color and size of the circle. It's just a weak aura that's there so that you don't lose your cursor in the heat of battle. You can ignore this dungeon RIO and class weak aura. I don't use it. The Mythic Auto Marker weak aura. This is very good for tanks in Mythic Plus because what this does is whenever you go into a dungeon, anytime you hover over certain packs, they will automatically be marked. So it allows you to quickly mark stuff without actually having to physically mark them. And you can more easily communicate what targets you want to kill first if you're in comms and things of that nature. Finally, I do have Noogie's party CD front end and the back end. What this is that when you're in a party, next to each player's frames, you will see what cooldowns they have up and which ones they do not have up. There are better add-ons for this. I barely even use this one anymore. I do have it up in the dungeons, but I don't really even look at it anymore. Most of the time I can tell whether or not someone has used a CD that is worth noting. So, you know, if a druid uses his trees, I will see it. If I see a binding shot go down, I will see it. Or, you know, usually when I'm running away from packs, for example, if I'm not really paying that much attention, you'll see the packs get rooted. So I know the hunter binding shotted. Point being, I'm not really using this weak aura that much anymore. I do still recommend having a party tracker as a tank. It will let you know if everyone has their interrupts up or not, and it will let you know if your healer has his CDs up for you. So does he have Iron Bark available? Those things are good to know as a tank, and so that's why I would recommend running that weak aura. But aside from those guys, there really aren't any other weak auras that I use. This is the list. It is pretty short. You can add and pick and choose a ton of other weak auras out there. These are just the ones I choose to run. I don't really feel a need for that many kinds of weak auras. I just have the very basic stuff, and that's all I really feel like I need to tank Mythic Plus keys. Moving on then to the last section of the video, which is going to be the add-ons, and what would any WoW player be without deadly boss mods? Now, add-ons can be important, but like anything else in the game, they're not necessary, and they're not necessarily going to make you a better player unless you use them correctly. I could play the game without DBM, for example, but in doing so, I would just be adding an extra layer of difficulty for no real reason. That said, DBM is the first add-on that I recommend to anyone who plays World of Warcraft. It's going to alert you to when there are mechanics coming up, it'll alert you when the mechanic actually happens, and it will do so in a way that is hard to miss. Unless you're bad like me, in that case you just get hit by the mechanics even after DBM has been yelling at you. You can customize just about anything about the add-on, so the core UI things, you can set up different profiles, all kinds of stuff. I have a very base setup with this add-on. I just have it set up so that it shows up right about here on the right hand side of my screen, and I kind of just leave it alone. I don't really do anything special with it, but I highly recommend it. The next add-on I recommend for tanks is definitely Mythic Dungeon Tools. Now, I've recommended this many times before on my channel, but if you don't know what it is, Mythic Dungeon Tools gives you a map, layout of your dungeons, all 8 of them, and it's going to show you exactly where all the packs are, how much percentage the packs give, so on and so forth. This is going to let you plan out your dungeons. You're going to be able to know exactly what you're going to be pulling in the dungeon. 100% must use for tanks. I do recommend it for every single player that takes M+ seriously, because even the DPS and the healers should be knowing what you're going to pull, when you're going to pull it, how to plan your CDs around the pulls. But for tanks specifically, especially in higher M+, this is going to be required. People are going to expect you to have this. The other add-on I have, obviously Details. Many people already have this installed, but Details is a damage and healing meter. It's very good. It breaks down exactly how you do your damage, which is really good. You're going to have a ton of information that's going to allow you to min-max everything that you want. It'll break down your healing. You can look at buff up times, trinket up times. You can look at how somebody died. You can look at how you died. There's a lot of information that Details chronicles for you that is going to be very relevant and will help you learn from your mistakes or just show you stats that you might want to know. Obviously, as I went over my weak auras already, you guys know I do have weak auras installed. It is an add-on for you to install, and then you download your weak auras into the add-on, but weak auras is another add-on that I do have. And aside from that, guys, everything else is pretty much just filler. I mean, I do recommend having the Raiderio add-on. That way, whenever you're looking for groups, this pane will pop up here. This is my Raiderio right now, right? So you can see the dungeons I've done. But if I'm looking for other groups, I can see the leaders IO. If people are signing up to my group, I can see their IOs. Very useful. But that just about rounds out all the UI add-ons and weak auras that I have for the game. If you guys have any questions, any add-ons that you think I missed, any questions about the UI, the add-ons that I use, the weak auras, anything, please leave them down below in the comments. If you made it this far, consider subscribing, and I will see you all in the next video.